On the workshop bit first.
Would you like to?
No, I thought that people might be doing it. Okay. So, Lorraine asked if I would, sorry, my name's Adam Thorpe. I work with Lorraine, Marcus and Christine colleagues at CSM in the Design Against Crime Research Centre. So what we concern ourselves with the last 10 years is looking at ways that design can reduce opportunities for crime, and by reducing opportunities, reduce the incidence of crime and the impacts that those incidents might have. It's always involved us working with lots and lots of different people because it's a complex sort of challenge. You don't quite know what the key drivers are, how the different factors interrelate, and so you have to work with very diverse groups, victims, offenders, to get their accounts of what their scripts were in terms of what happened, so you can try and work out what you would like to design to accommodate the legitimate use and what you'd like to design to dissuade or deter, which would be the criminal act. So, we've been working like that for about 10 years. Then we've also, more recently, been realising that actually, similarly to the complexity of crime as a design context, other social contexts, so ageing population, the changes to National Health Service that we've been observing and hearing so much about at the moment, why the bed's so full, the beds aren't meant to fill up until the end of January, why they fill up at Christmas, and that's meant to be not the busiest time of the winter. Part of it is that we can't send people out of hospital because they're old, we've got an ageing population. If we send them out of hospital, back to their communities, there's nobody there to care for them, because that's where they've had central government funding cuts to the local authority budget. We're looking at another complex challenge, is my point. So all of these things have complex challenges, lots of different people involved. We have to bring those different people together and their different agendas together. So we're interested in terms of the work that we do in how do you bring together some of these sometimes conflicting perspectives, because there's competition around resources, there's competition around disciplinary expertise, that who's going to receive these resources to solve this problem. There's lots of different conflicting agendas. And part of what we need to do is try and bring people together to work those through. So if you imagine a line that sort of goes from there to there, we'd start here with this idea of basically sense making and moving towards problem solving. So this would be the scope of what can design do. What can design do? It can make sense of something by visualising, by iterating, by talking to people, by doing sort of research, all the way along to this area here, where actually if we all work together on it, do a bunch of iterations and apply it, we might actually solve the problem. The sort of work we're doing increasingly is in the context of public service reform, where there isn't any money to solve the problem. Central government hasn't got any money, or so they say, local government hasn't got any money, or so they say. So what we're addressed with is this necessary shift from being recipients of public services to being active participants in the creation and delivery of public services. That type of activity needs to be designed and needs to be facilitated. So the idea that people can be working together to look after each other and look after their interests from a design perspective is dependent on the fact that these people can actually coexist in the first instance before they can even collaborate. So the idea that someone can coexist, then collaborate to meet each other's needs is dependent on this action around sense making. And what we know is that not only is it sense making, in this process of collaborating, trying to make sense of something, you actually become sensitive to the other people that you're working with. So you get a long-term unemployed person working with an older person, working with a younger person, working with a learning different person. You join up all of these different people. So that brings us on to, if I can find my notes, I've given you the background of where we are with design, and now I'm going to try and pick out some of the elements that I think relate to what we've heard today in terms of restorative justice. So really the first bit of it is one of the things that came out earlier on today was this idea that restorative practice, it was called at the point that person was talking, restorative practice is about connections and relationship. And basically this idea of sort of restorative practice being about sort of healing and closing these gaps to form these connections and build these relationships, this is something that we think we can probably learn something for, and need to learn something for, if we're expecting people to come together and collaborate in this sort of sense-making activity and making sensitive activity, public forming activity that we talked about. Because ultimately, with these complex challenges, the way to solve these complex challenges is to distribute the complexity. You can't centralise it and try and solve it from there. It needs to be spread out, and people need to be left to some extent to find their own solutions with support. And that idea of finding your own solutions with support, that seemed also to ring true with some of the narrative that was coming through around restorative justice. You can do so much as a restorative justice practitioner, it seems to me, listening to the talk that people are talking about today, within a particular framework of interaction, within a particular context of operation, but ultimately it's down to the people themselves that are going to be able to sort of make that restoration, to repair that thing that's been lost. And that is similar to the context that we're working in here. There's conversation as well around this idea of the expert mindset. Now, in design terms, we talk about people as experts for their own experience. A service user might not be an expert, they might not be able to sort of articulate very clearly sort of exactly how the daycare centre for the elderly is sort of designed, managed, run and funded. But actually, as a person that's experiencing that daycare centre, they'll be pretty expert, probably more expert than the person that's funding it, running it and so on, in terms of how that service is received and what it feels like to receive that service. And so that idea of acknowledging that there's some types of expertise that are necessary. I think we heard about this sort of skillful and mindful, well, it didn't have to be a professional, we said, it could be a volunteer, but the skillful and mindful, experienced restorative justice practitioner could actually enable this deep, thick empathy to occur rather than the thin empathy to occur. So there is some expertise there that evidently is being developed and applied, perhaps through the majority of experience that someone's got of actually doing this stuff. But that's not to say that there isn't some sort of, that expert mindset is the thing that's going to dictate the success of the process. So it's about how do we combine those two elements? And those questions are very true to the practice that we're working in. How do you combine the expert designer with the people that are the experts of their own experience? The other thing is that there's some talk about quality. The idea that the responses that occur in terms of the extent to which the gap or the wounds or that which has been lost has been sort of repaired or restored through these restorative justice processes. There was some idea that this was to do with the quality of the storytelling and the fact that actually it was the quality of the ability, the skills of the practitioner and the quality of the questioning that helped bring the story out in the restorative justice context and made a difference to the quality of the restorative activity and of the response. Well, in design context, we understand that the quality of being able to identify what that story is a key contributor. So identifying the story and identifying those needs is a key contributor to the quality of the response you're going to get in that context as well. And we've got a number of different methods, ethnographic research methods that we use that fundamentally are around looking, listening and feeling, which it seemed were quite similar to our colleague that showed us this sort of helical aspect. We've got methods that help us look, methods that help us listen and question, and methods that help us to feel, whether it's putting on an ageing suit and then walking around for a year in that way to actually experience what it's like, or some of what it's like to be older. But I think we also need to be reminded by one of our colleagues from restorative justice practice that was talking today, saying that even though we may put on this ageing suit, walk around, experience some elements of what it is like to have impaired vision, restricted movement, actually that's not going to give us the full picture in terms of feeling what it's like to be. You can take that suit off. The fact that you can take that suit off, you will always be aware of to some extent. That's going to change your appreciation of that experience. So being cautious about how much empathy and what value you can set by the quality of the empathic experience that we're having is also worth bearing in mind. There's some talk about safe spaces for restorative justice, the idea that actually it's a very, people can be very vulnerable when they open up and reflect on the damage they've caused or the damage that's been done, particularly the damage that it's caused, and how these safe spaces might be physical safe spaces, a cell you can't hang yourself in. They might be social safe spaces, and in fact in this breakout session we just had now, the idea of how you configure a meeting, a restorative meeting. One of our colleagues was talking about the fact that you have the people closest to those people, actually physically closest and most central to the process. and then gradually moving out to the more remote for public service offers perhaps, or other support services. The idea there being that actually people can be supported by the assets available to them. And that sort of idea of safe space, not just in the physical design of the space, but safe space in terms of the actors that are available to you and the social infrastructure that's available to you, that's a very important understanding, and something again that we have parallels with in this notion of design for social innovation, design that looks to find new ways for people to work together to design solutions to social challenges. We talk about de-risked environments, places where you can try stuff out, because actually the thing with social innovation is there's always something new in it. So even if it's an old idea in a new context, or a new idea in an existing context, or new both, there's always something new, and because there's something new, we don't know if it's going to work, or quite how it's going to work. So we need to understand how we're going to de-risk that environment, and how we're going to create a space for safe interaction and a safe experiment. And it seems to me that actually lots of this restorative activity is very experimental. You don't know how it's going to come out. So how you manage the risks around that, maybe there's something we can learn from that as well. Because you're never certain whether someone's going to jump up and run out of the room, once you've opened that box, or whether they're going to stay and you're going to get some other sort of dialogue going. There's other methodologies that we can go into more detail on, the parallels between the empathic design process, which is about discovery, so entering the world and achieving willingness with the user as a designer trying to find out about someone else's life. The idea around immersion, which is about taking the user's point of reference. Connection, which is about actually resonating with the user's point of reference and checking that your assumptions about what you're experiencing are what they're experiencing. And then actually this idea around detachment. So as a designer, once you've gone into someone else's world, experienced it, gained some insight, you then detach. And actually that detachment is then what enables you to, you're stopping being empathic at that point, when you detach, because you're going to take those insights and apply them as a designer, to actually take some action. I think that's something that seems to come out of the restorative justice stuff. So, well, what's the point of the empathy unless it's going to lead to some sort of positive action? And so actually we do have a parallel to that. And we do leave the scene with the information and apply it as designers. And actually it seemed that there was a real match-up between these sort of stages of empathic design process and the 5 stages rather than 4 that were described around what happens, exploring thoughts and feelings, considering impacts and exploring needs, and then this idea of looking at ways forward that seems to come out as a sort of restorative justice pathway. So that was quite remarkable, the match-up that you were getting there. What else we got? Actually, I think then, if we were, for me, so I'm going to sort of sum up now, because I can go on and on and on, because there are so many interesting parallels and great insights. So for me, in terms of what's one of the takeaways for me, it seems, in this context, is some of the questions that come up this afternoon about how can we, it seems to me, how can we get more empathy, how can we get more restorative justice into more parts of society? If restorative justice is actually going to deliver the returns that everyone seems to think it can, and I share that, but I think it's got the ability to deliver some significant returns, it seems, then how can we actually get that restorative process into more parts of society? And one of the points that I think we can do it in is in this sort of collaborative design activity. And actually being able to use that collaborative design activity that we're talking about is a site for restorative process in terms of bringing people together, getting people to see each other's perspective, understanding the view of the other. It's an asset-oriented activity, working with what you've got. The idea of design, what I've taken away from this is a perspective of actually thinking about design for social justice, because that's what I'm getting from this restorative justice. It's like, where's the bigger significance of restorative justice? It's not just, I'm not trying to demean the value or importance of justice in the understanding of cops, courts and corrections, and the role of restorative justice in that context. But actually, we've got a vision and a glimpse of this potential of restorative justice in terms of social justice, and how can we restore the gap that actually occurs within our society in terms of social justice, and what are the processes and the learnings that we can take from restorative justice in the context that it's got its maturity in here, and see if we can apply that in these other social interactions and social engagements to try to restore some social justice to the situation that we find ourselves in. And that's something that our research centre and our research activities, both around Design Against Crime and Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability is fully focused upon, is about how can we design for more social justice. So what we're learning is of incredible value to us, and thank you for sharing it with us. And if we can make contributions back when we're back at CSM around some of, in more detail around some of our practices and how they might contribute to the work that you do, then that would be, we'd be very glad to be able to sort of return that gift that you've given us in terms of sharing the insights and the practices that you have. So thank you very much for that. And for me, I think the key thing around methodology is understanding more about the listening. The listening that seems to, the active listening that takes place in restorative justice, that's something that we could directly learn from in terms of methodology around the listening element of listening, looking and feeling. And also some of the interactions around when you're actually in that room, having that engagement. Who sits where? How do you talk to each other? Who speaks first? And how do we feel about sort of pregnant pauses? Is that okay? Is that good? This stuff that you guys have got a massive experience in a very critical context is something that we could actually learn a lot from and use when we're having the conversations and doing the interviewing and trying to find out and form the alliances that we are in design for social innovation. So those are my thoughts for now, and then sort of over to everyone else to have the conversation around it.
Anybody want to ask any questions?
Not so much a question, but about this mapping. I think it would be very, very interesting to look at performance terminology and try to do some similar mapping with that around, problem identification, resolution, objectives, obstacles to resolution. I think because there's this mapping, if you like, I'm very intrigued by this sort of thin empathy and thick empathy, and mapping that out about processes that come from performance, which I would say are productive, good practices, as opposed to ones that could probably lead to weaker, thinner, less satisfactory resolutions and outcomes.
I think that's from our session. One of the questions that came up is that does restorative justice as a process always have to be to do with the criminal justice system? And how might you re-understand it? And I think that when you start talking about like design for democracy almost, like co-designing, finding ways to work with community groups.
It's designed for fairness, isn't it? It's like some of the work we've done in Camden.
And I suppose that maybe the word empathy is a way of taking it into different places. Because the issue is I think that the process itself that exists as restorative justice is a process that's much needed. I know that the two previous speakers have issues about how restorative justice is developing, but I don't think anyone was taking from the fact that we need restorative justice. But the argument is that I know in schools there are some programs that work in this way. But it seems that what you seem to be saying is that design could learn from restorative justice and performance and take it into other arenas. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was trying to check my understanding from what our last two colleagues were saying, which seemed to me there seemed to me to be a bit of a tricky conversation going on around whether actually this type of approach to restorative justice was a natural grassroots community-centred activity or whether it was a professionalised activity that was driven by funded outcomes or the outcomes that the funders desire. And linked to that sort of conversation, there's this question of actually where do we need where do we need restoration and where do we need restorative justice and what sort of justice is the point I was trying to make. So it doesn't just have to be cops, courts and corrections justice. There are other injustices, other unfairnesses that are present within society that actually we could try and repair through these ways of listening and listening, finding our common ground, our differences and working together. And if we were going to take that approach and apply it in these different contexts, then actually one context would be design, another context might be theatre. I mean, to some extent you could argue that's what people like that have tried to do and have done in sort of forum theatre and those other sort of applications of theatre. Or indeed in other sort of practices. So in teaching, the idea of this sort of, I think there was something around social pedagogy. One of the they were talking about sort of restorative justice in the context of social pedagogy. Now, what we're doing within Camden now, with the council around this public innovation lab we're working on, if you want people to be able to work together to provide sort of new solutions to new challenges, then actually what we're talking about is sort of learning together by doing together. There isn't really anyone to teach you how to do it, because it's going to be down to your assets and your specific assets in your specific context. There are some frameworks, there is some guidance, there is some facilitation, but ultimately it's going to be down to what you guys can do together that is sustainable in your context. And I think that was what I felt our colleagues were saying this afternoon, and what I was trying to sort of pick up on is that not just the criminal context. There's a couple of questions, or contributions, not
I was
questions
just
of
saying
that.
really about just following on from what you were saying, writing it out. I mean, talking about empathy, mediation services that are all over the country, bringing two people together, is about empathising with each other. So it's not just within the context of the criminal justice system.
Can I just add to that? That restorative approaches is being very widely developed. You'll be pleased to hear if you're not aware already. I mean, in some schools it's working terrifically. We're hearing very good reports about headmasters down, having that the whole ethos is one of trying to, avoid barring kids from school, finding solutions within the context of the activities of the whole institution. I mean, for those who aren't familiar with it, the Restorative Justice Council website is really worth looking at. Just RJC, you will find out a lot of what goes on and what is going on, events and that. But it really is beginning to gather momentum in a very positive way. Schools, workplaces, other places. It's kind of, mediation has been there beforehand, but now a restorative approach, slightly different approach, is also being used very widely.
I think my point around that was really that they are probably easier areas to make progress in. So, are they the ones to go for, rather than the difficult journey within the criminal justice system? I think you do. I'm just saying that you want to make progress and get a reputation and build credibility, then they're probably worth pushing.
The non-criminal context for this sort of restorative activity.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not by no means abandoning the criminal bit. I'm just saying that you've got a chance of making headway there. But as I said earlier, the criminal justice system is a fairly rule-orientated, conservative bit of the business, whereas some of the other parts of it, where it's being used very productively, are less so.
So I've watched both mediation and restorative justice, and I find the funding side of things, government funding is coming down for the RJ side of things, not so much mediation. So it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for funding and getting your name out there and things like that, then the RJ thing's the way to go. But it's all part of the same bag, it's all conflict resolution, how to resolve conflict.
I mean, we're always looking for, in terms of if you're looking for funding in design terms, but design for social innovation is always looking for funding because it's not about serving the market, it's about serving society, and there's never any money around for that. So, we're always looking for funding.
Funding for mediation. Mediation services are struggling for funding to get funding, to try neighbour disputes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas restorative justice is, government recognise the value in that. It's guided perhaps because it's offender targeted and trying to reduce reoffending, not more victim targeted.
Yeah,
but it's misguided, but it's funding is there for that sort of process.
Yeah.
Just stop on a couple of things today, really. The one that made me start to question why I do this, but it started to question really what I've been observing the last few years. I'm not an RJ practitioner, I'm an academic researcher in that context. So, as I mentioned before, my research has been in the prison context, observing restorative justice within prisons. with offenders who committed serious crimes that they're serving long sentences. And subsequently, I've also observed some restorative justice in the community as well, largely around body crime, things like shoplifting and so on. But in both those cases, and they're quite different from both those examples, what I was struck with is the fact that the process became one of concentration or discussion around facts. And it was a speaker before that said, actually, perhaps you should ask more about what somebody doubts about something about rather than what they did. But I think it's partly because in the criminal justice context, you normally have a law enforcement presence, literally, physically presence. In the prisons, it had to be the prison officer that was there for safety reasons, if nothing else. And in the other context, there's always a police officer involved. And they are trained, and it's in their nature to think about what happened in terms of, if you like, it sounds an old-fashioned notion, but fact. What, where, how, and so on. They're not necessarily interested, or it's not their job to think about how somebody reacted and doubts about something. So when I started to observe these things, so a classic case, or a typical example would be the next of kin of somebody that's been killed by an offender, been murdered by an offender. The next of kin, after all the due process, would meet the offender inside the prison, and they would tend to talk about the events of the crime. Often the victim wanted, or the victim's next of kin wanted to know more about what happened. And I automatically assumed, because she, it's often a she, man had been killed, that she would actually relate the impact upon her and her family, that the offender would naturally know about the emotional impact of this. But now thinking about it, very rarely was the emotional impact explicitly spelled out. Now, very rarely they say, did I feel this way about it? I felt this emotion. And I assumed that the offender would be able to work this out for themselves. But some of the things you were saying earlier, what other people were saying, made me start to question this. Perhaps, they were just, they didn't work out the fact that if this was the impact on his family, that made those people feel sad. And, that bereavement is a form of deep sadness. I just took that for granted.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
I'm actually involved, one of the jobs, I work with Thames Valley mainly, in restorative justice service, which has been going for a long time. But I also work as a volunteer, and I have been involved with the MOJ programme that's been running for the last 3 years of training people throughout the country in prisons, probation, volunteers, and police. In a fairly short training. And we would have concerns about the skills people are developing, whether they're getting enough support and mentoring in following up those skills. And the kind of case you're describing does require somebody fairly experienced, really, it's a serious crime like death, and people who are less skilled will stick to the facts.
So that's what Theo was saying. How I understood his paper was that, my friend's a shrink, she's my best friend, and she works in a school, she does family circles, and she does the restorative. They don't call it restorative justice, they call it family circle. And her concern is that she is able to provide to the families, they've had stabbings of the children, they're involved in the restorative process, a continued presence. She is available to them. And what Theo's concern was is that, they've been trained very quickly, they don't have the skills, they don't ask the right questions, and there's not the support within the system. And I think they are valid concerns.
Yes.
And I would correlate by saying in crime prevention, the Design Out Crime Association have trained police officers in very similar ways around about sex ed. And there have been similar issues. Some practitioners who are amazing coppers, who have years of practice, could be in a station where another copper has had the same training and doesn't have the skills. And why that is about self-interest, ability, all sorts of things, about self-education as well. And so I think that Theo's point was a good point, actually. And it's one, I suppose, where what I thought he was saying was, look, it's flavour of the month, restorative justice. And that good restorative justice, the stuff we've learned about today, makes really, really a difference. But if it's going to be just whacked out by the Ministry of Justice, in a cynical way to tick boxes, then there is a problem.
I agree with that, and I think it comes down to your question, what you said earlier on about where's it come from? Is it the community, was it sort of government-led? And where it was in the community, and it's been transformed from the community to be taken up by the government, and it's government-led, and they've got their own agenda about things and how they want to process things. And that's where the RJ field is going. You're training up a lot of people into RJ, haven't got the skill set because they've done a few days of training on it. You haven't got the experience of dealing with these cases, and that's my concern about the snowballing. We talked about the tipping point in RJ circles some years ago, and this tipping point when RJ is going to become the mainstream, and it has reached that tipping point. It's gone over that point now, and now sort of floodgates are open, and it's all. My concern is that quality of RJ.
Yeah, what do you think about the idea that RJ sort of techniques and process elements of RJ, if you like, end up moving into other practices? So it's not called RJ, it just becomes integrated into a collaborative design workshop or a theatre, collaborative theatre workshop, or the way.
That's fine. I mean, RJ is turned into restorative approaches or sort of practice in schools, that kind of thing. Absolutely great, because you're still dealing with the same sort of thing about harm and who's been harmed, who's the harmer. So you're dealing with it in a slightly different way. But when it comes to the serious cases, you've got serious offending behaviour. And that kind of thing.
I think this is really interesting because what it's saying then is that because a lot of there was a moment there. I mean, obviously I'm quite new to this RJ space, so it's for me it's new hearing a lot of what you guys are talking about, and what I was asked to do was try and relate the new stuff I heard today to stuff that we know from our own practices. But one of the things that seemed to come out earlier on, it was almost like there was this argument about either it's restorative justice like that or it's restorative practice like that. And it seems to me, listening to your explanation here and more sort of detail around it, that it's not either or. It's like actually there's a certain type of restorative process that requires a certain type of very expert practice according to the gravity and the seriousness and the criticality of the situation you're dealing with. But that's not to say that actually there can be some restorative practices that will be of benefit in other areas. This idea of getting more restorative practice into more general, integrating into other parts of culture. And that becomes quite interesting, which makes me think part of one of the processes that we might go through as a group of people working together over the next few months is to try to map some of that out in the same way you're talking about mapping the methods and comparing and contrasting the methods, similarities and differences. What does the restorative practice landscape look like? And as designers, we can help you do that. In terms of visualising this thing about, okay, well, there's these clusters, these practices are more critical, these ones are less critical, these ones are around the criminal justice system, these other instances, there's this in the classroom, sometimes it's like this, sometimes. Just so to me, there's probably a way of organising that information, which then would enable this argument to be more for other people without the experience that you guys have got to access the sort of nuances of this argument more rapidly. So you can sort of go, right, that and that, you need to be a qualified practitioner, but of X years standing, this and this. Actually, there's no harm in there being some, a day-long course.
I think as soon as it starts to go to other areas, you start to probably maybe prevent a lot of those serious situations, because might sound silly, but when you were talking about this restorative practice, I was thinking restorative thinking from the very beginning. And I remember I've seen a Disney movie during Christmas because I've been with my nieces, and things as simple as a movie, there was no good and bad character anymore in this movie, and that shocked me quite a lot. There was people that were doing good and bad things, and some other people doing good and bad things. And the same thing happened when I was observing my sister, how you punish children. You can punish them for doing something right or wrong, or but nobody usually punishes them ask that much, why did you do that? Because there's no time. I mean, I don't blame that, but that from the very beginning, you can reflect that in society. And I don't know.
It sounds to me like you're talking about can those approaches that are applied within restorative justice be applied to prevention of situations that mean you're going to need restorative justice?
Well, absolutely. I'm going to say it's terrific for parents, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to train my kind of love to say what happened, rather than, my God, you've done it again, you know. Find out what happened. That's the first question we start, you know, keep it open.
There's,
You know.
sorry,
So I'm just keen about the idea of the 3-day training and that people can go off and do it. And I think that you know, that is dangerous to think that. I think there is a 3-day training course or that people have to do initially, the very foundations that you have to do 4 days or 20 hours face-to-face training, but that's just the very beginning. And now the Restorative Justice Council are the sort of overseeing body, but people now have to show that they have to be accredited.
I think that came up too, didn't it, about skill. You know, what
Yeah.
TJ was saying was that basically, you know, it's not about management of a process, you know, it's about the skill of the practitioner. And that, I think that, you know, we're sort of talking about moving from specialism to generalism in a way. And like, I think having a generalist discourse that's a restorative discourse can only be a good thing for justice. That can only be, like, if we start to think about what is the harm of things, that must be positive. But I sort of like the notion that there are skilled people like Michael around who facilitate, you know, a well-managed and
But there's research 2004, Paul McCold and Ted Walktown, what we've been talking about. It's a really nice Venn diagram, and at the centre, where the 3 circles come together, is what is defined as true restorative justice, where you have victim, offender, and their communities. And it's a really good diagram of fully restorative justice, partially restorative, and then mildly restorative, yeah? And it's a really good illustration of which practice fits within which zone. To me, I'm absolutely pro that in terms of the argument. Restorative practice can be used in schools with great effect, and that is, I think Mr. Johnson said, it's easier to go into schools, yeah? But in Dungannon, in the great Northern Ireland, is Dungannon Integrated College, which is a school which is completely restorative in its nature and its problem solving, and they train the facilitators or different age groups from within the school, and they have a restorative conference room, if you like. It's not called a restorative justice room, it's the conference room or the talking spot or something like that. And these kids are the trained facilitators. They get playground conflict, classroom conflict, and they manage themselves properly supervised, because supervision is a key area in this, the practitioners and whatnot. But it's there's research around that will answer a lot of the questions you've got. And it is used, and where the RJC comes into it is, again, that's grown massively in the last 10 years, but you will get groups of professionals who will say, I do restorative justice and I do it the proper way our group does, yeah? And other people will be in conflict, and this is what Thea was trying to illustrate, that other people will say, no, there's conflict between mediators and restorative practitioners, and there shouldn't be this conflict. That's what Thea was saying. Are we going to go and do the work? To me, mediation is a facilitator or a mediator, person A there and person B here, and there's probably this dispute, this conflict is there, and the mediator tries to work out, or get people to work out a solution, and like the judge says, go away, talk together. That's what the mediator's job is. If you look at expanding that, where that person feels vulnerable and unable to express their views with the mediator, you're then moving into conferencing and having a community of support, a micro community around, and that other person's, and then you're moving into conferencing. It's just about different ways and different practices, and they all fit within this restorative zone. And those within the Restorative Council who cannot meet the criteria to be a fully accredited restorative practitioner, meaning you have to evidence conferences that you've done, they then have sort of maybe drifted off and said, well, we do not restorative justice, we do restorative practice or restorative approaches, and it's to if you like, keep their control over their domain, and yet it's underlying principles in all of this is better resolution of conflict, better practice. So I've got to the stage sometimes where I'm asked to do some work, be it training or whatever, and I don't use the word restorative justice because people go, oh no, it's been vilified in the press. It's the easy option. The offender gets away with it, yeah. And if it's done properly, the Met Police ran a really long-term project with the Home Office, and the guy is still around, Brian Dowling, who was like one of the lead, and he did hundreds of conferences in prisons, out of prisons, and then it drifted because it was possibly thought an area where maybe police officers were not the best placed people to be doing facilitation. And it's all about learning and development, and I don't know whether you could come in on that, Phil, from your experiences.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we spoke in our little group before that certainly I now see more so that empathy is the main key. And I've been involved as a practitioner in our jail processes, and I found that it's worked a lot better when you've had a steward and someone from mediation who has got that sort of more empathy they can inject into the process, and that is a more fully rounded process, as opposed to it being from a police officer's perception how the process should be run, sort of thing.
So what we're talking about is there. We need to just unpack it. And,
well, the arguments that you're making make sense to me. I've been working with Brighton University on some stuff around inclusive arts practice. So you've got a group of learning different people, and the arguments there are, is it important that they're working with trained artists to do this arts activity, or could they just could anybody just sit down next to these people with a pot of paint and get on with it? And the argument that we would make is that it's very important that you're working with very professional artists, trained artists, because there's something about the you're going to get the quality that otherwise why are we training our artists? If you're not going to give this person this quality of experience, then why bother? Is it that these people should only get a certain value of experience? That anyone can just chuck at them, or actually, are we going to treat them in the same way that we treat other people that want to be trained by someone that knows what they're doing? And since it makes sense to me that the argument would carry into restorative justice circles as well. I guess the next question is where's the money come from?
Can I just add one thing to what's been said before? I don't think I said to everybody here, but I've been a prison governor for 29 years, and when I heard that restorative justice was going to be spread throughout the country, I was absolutely delighted, because I thought that this would be one of the best ways of trying to change the culture of the prison into a positive culture. And there is that aspect of it. Unfortunately, I think there's big cutbacks in staff, big cutbacks in money, and they're going to go on increasing these big cutbacks, so my optimism is diminished. But there are some very positive things about prison officers doing this and learning these skills. Now, even if you use them in it's a very simple process, basically. I think you'll probably agree, wouldn't you? I think all those who do it. It is simple. And it can be done at various levels of skill without being damaging. So I think it's very important to hang on to the positive, because one of the reasons I think why it's now becoming very popular is because it is an attainable skill. And people will develop with practice and courage and attention. But basically, it's a very positive development. It's just unfortunate if there isn't enough resources to support it and develop it.
And I think Theo highlighted, I don't know whether anyone picked up on it, when he's worked with people in various disciplines or domains, whatever way you want to, different areas, a lot of people, and I find this, say, well, I don't think I'm going to be able to deal with this, but when they actually sit down and give them the opportunity to do training, look at themselves and reflective practice, they will say at the end of a course and practice that's supported by supervision and feedback all the time, they say, well, I was 80% restorative in any event because of the way that I developed as an individual, and that is there and they don't recognise it. And it's I think I felt like that, and throughout the time that I spent in the police doing a lot of victim work, working with victims and offenders, and then there was particular areas where I was a victim statement taker chief and best evidence person, and taking all that evidence from the victim. And I think that's where maybe my naturally empathic, or did I develop that? There was very good training within the police service to do that sort of work. And then it's so refreshing to hear from a practitioner, I now realise I was like this. And it's the quality of training and the ability of the person doing the training to say, this is what it should look like, might look like, can we do it? And it's a fascinating topic. Go on all day. Shut up.
The other thing I think I got mentioned was you need time for the process to work. It can't be timed like you've got a
6
half hour
weeks.
slot. You know, to do the process, you can't say to someone, we've got to resolve this in 30 minutes. And certainly, like,
6 weeks?
with Stuart, obviously, when there's been some before, they've overrun and been sort of over an hour long, more than double the sort of decreed time that you sort of allocate to a process. So I think time's important, because if you get someone with the opinion, we'll just tick the box to complete the process, and it must be done in 30 minutes. You're not going to be fully listening, and you're not going to extract the full story of the circumstance.
It's, that's the target setting, ticking the box, if you want to describe it like that, where you have the set time. I used to run a Wednesday evening clinic, and I wouldn't do more than, depended on the level of offending rate, but I wouldn't do more than 2 in that evening. I would set aside more than enough time, A, to do the feedback and get the records, keep the records straight. Because if you bunch them in, and I've seen this, I've been to Belfast where they've got their youth justice service, and they've got the most fantastic set of rooms, 3 different sets of conference rooms. We can run 3 at a time, and nobody in any of the processes will come together or interfere with each other. You know, purpose-built conference rooms, this is where the design element comes into it, and they are fantastic. You can do all sorts of, not manipulation, but managing the conference, where the victim can sit in a totally enclosed room that's, if you like, they're in that room there when we're in here having the main conference, and they can see through, but we can't see there. But if at any time that victim changes their mind, and they do, they say, that's not the monster I thought he or she was, and they can have a break, and the victim will come in and join the main conference. All sorts of stuff.
We've had problems at the police station where we've run a restorative practice clinic, if you like, to resolve, and rather than people receive a court case or etc., they get issued like caution within the process. But we've had it, it goes down to planning again, where we've had victims bumping into offenders whilst waiting in the front reception of police stations, or we've had co-defendants that wanted to be part of the process bumping into their co-defendant that is just there because they feel they have to be, and then causing those extra sort of frictions. So yeah, I mean, having somewhere with independent conference rooms would be the idea.
And then, are you reinstitutionalising the whole process? Are you making it part of the whole legal system? If it has to come to that, I would say, if we want to do this stuff and get it moving, we have to do it. Regardless of, if you like, this is not real restorative justice, or you're controlling it, or whatever. If it brings the victim and the offender together in a safe environment, and they get what they want from it, then I would rather do it than not do it.
I think sometimes at a police station, it's quite handy the fact that it is an official process, and you're not going to get a young person to deal with young people who's not going to fail to attend because they're duty bound to come along to a police station. So it kind of adds a bit of gravitas to it as well, and for the victim as well, to understand that this is a proper process.
It'd be a big argument with certain factors within RJ of saying it shouldn't be held in the police station, it should be out in the community. It's community-based.
Doesn't it depend on the extent of the severity of the crime, or
Right,
the
and
severity
the
of
type
the type of crime?
sexual hate and serious violence aren't applicable to those. So it's the more volume and lower end stuff.
That's
Because it seems to me that
first time entrance applicable for the offender types.
Tim's presentation from New Zealand to America, back to Europe and the UK, the traditional New Zealand 1989 Children and Their Families Act, when they returned to what they said was community-based justice, they held it in these open, I think they're called mares, they're like open community, circular in nature because of the way their cultural sort of way of dealing with things. And the ideal would be to design a community centre where you could deal with all sorts of school issues, social care issues, everything within a community restorative building, but it would have all of the, and it would be neutral in terms of the police don't own it, the local authority doesn't own it, the youth offending team don't own it. It would be a community centre for restorative justice, restorative practice, and that would be a dream thing. When I went to Belfast, I couldn't believe how safe you could make it, yeah? And yet there's severe criticism of it's within the youth offending team zone, the courts can order people to participate in this, but they did it and they stuck their necks out and they've really come on and lived.
And also knowing, because there is an opportunity at the moment around, particularly in the area that we're working in, so that some of the London boroughs, there is an opportunity because of the changes in public service provision to start, people are re-looking at community centres as service hubs. And the idea that if people are going to start helping each other out, then where are they going to come together to do that? Where are they going to come together to discuss that? And the idea that you could, you've got your example from Belfast, which is the absolute, what you would do if you had the budget and everyone wanted to do it. So then it's almost trying to get an understanding of what the elements of that are. So if you had to do it on a budget, on a shoestring, what would you do? Is there access control? So you make sure you've got 2 entrances, for example. So it's like, one group will come in there, one. So it's like, well, have we got 2 entrances? Yeah, okay, so that's, it doesn't need to, understanding what the elements that are required. So it could work as a day centre, it could work as a play group place, and it could work as a restorative justice place because you've got these 2 doors on it. Just to me, it would be really useful in this sort of situation.
And shared between the different boroughs.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get, if you like, a huge, intense back-to-back like you would in the Belfast scene. They're almost coming from the youth court to go and do a conference. They do and they're going through like a system, almost like court cases. And they hold, I think, 5 a day, 3 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So that's 15 with 3 separate conferences. You could run 15 conferences in a day, and they are coming along through the system. But what happens is, re-institutionalise it. Instead of each individual police officer doing his case that he's, if you like, maybe the arresting officer or has responsibility for that case, you get that officer loaded up. Well, you're there today, you may as well do it at 3 in the morning. And what do you get from that? Burnout. You do. Particularly if you don't know the case. Yeah. So when I just went there and pick up all these things, being a co-facilitator, it's not my actual case, and it's dangerous. That is dangerous. If you don't know the ins and outs of the particular offending behaviour, it can have a poorer outcome. So there's lots and lots of exploration to do.
As experts in restorative justice, do you feel that there is value in training non-professionals to deal with certain types of restorative context, or do you see that as a pathway to poor quality and poor practice?
No, I think it's an advantage to have neutrals in there because you've got police officers dealing with police matters. You've got kind of changing hats. I'm a police officer, I'm a restorative officer, things going on all the time. And I know even in the speech that the police officers give at the clinics, they have to say that they are a police officer, and if they mention anything of a criminal nature, they're due to go to investigate. So that then puts their RJ off one side and they have to put it back on again.
I had that total exact conflict when I was a police officer. Doing youth offending conferences. You have conflict comes up in all sorts of ways. And I actually I've written that I would find that it's probably very difficult to be a police officer, dealing with a case where you've got an assault on a police officer and a juvenile who's committed that offence and have admitted it, and you're the police facilitator. Despite what neutral approach you take, there's that, whose side am I on here, guys? Especially if it goes maybe the way that it doesn't. Yeah? So I would say that having done it in the early days, that means we're talking about 10, 12 years ago, that I became uncomfortable in terms of the power that you had as a police officer. And you're torn. You're actually, in some respects, if you're doing an avoidance route, to change the route, you're being almost judge and jury in terms of how you're dealing with that matter. So again,
So better to train. So you're saying better to train up other people, sort of non-professionals, if you like, that can become more skilled over time.
Within the Youth Justice Service, most of the facilitation will be done by trained volunteers.
Right.
So they're volunteers from the local community that they live in, either live or work in that borough. And the idea being that they've got a stake in the place they live and that the young people who live in that borough.
Yeah.
So the idea is that those volunteers become trained facilitators with, as you said, proper supervision and training.
So you've got quite a diverse. So what the picture that's created is quite a diverse sort of landscape of practice, really. With some people that are very experienced in certain professional contexts that are very critical, others that necessarily don't need to be as experienced, but will become more experienced and more skillful over time.
And the idea being, though, that they are properly supervised and that they keep up their practice so that it's continual training, continual practice, and that they're working towards becoming accredited practitioners.
I think it's important for community empowerment to do that, and also I think from the sort of client's point of view, they might talk differently to a police officer or other professionals or social worker in a different way, but I think someone who's more neutral from a community point of view would extract a lot more quality and in building that trust as you do in the introduction and talks, etc. Whereas I think they might hold back with certain social workers or police officers for fear that they might trigger, they might say something that they didn't mean to, or it might trigger another investigation, etc.
Yeah.
As Stuart alluded to, where people say things, it's like, oh, no, that's different from your statement you provided. And I've had that before where accounts have been given, and when they retell the story, it's very different. But equally, what's also interesting is when they retell the story in front of parents, access appropriate adults, it's again a more true account of, in the process. So the excuse they perhaps use to their parents when they've been released from custody or something. And then the parents, you see the change in the parents' behaviour to being quite frosty at the start of the process, to a degree. So actually thinking, actually deserving, very lucky and thankful being able to take part in the process. So yeah, but I think from the community point of view, they would extract more if the right person who had empathy and had received the right training.
That's a good example of how different relationships get restored, isn't it, around it? Maybe it's in the relationship between the parent and the police and the woman.
I've had it where the parent is not wanting to be there, and you can see that sort of parent-child behaviour being presented in the child, if you like. But at the end of the process, the parent, something clicks. So actually, it is your fault, it is your doing, and actually you shouldn't have done that.
I might come in there and just say that I've seen that represented as hyphen story, restoring. There's a restoring from the original stories when everyone comes together into this conference circle or whatever it is, because the truth usually has to come out, because everyone's been prepared, and it will be evident if somebody's changed it or trying to rig it or whatever. And I like to look at that as the storytelling and the restoring and the truth and the quality of stuff that comes out. But when that happens, it's a really powerful impact, especially parents and children.
Taking down a lot of interviews, life stories, one with a professional thief. And I do accept that there is the truth of your remembered emotion, but it changes with time. And so the restory, maybe one that you can live with. Do you see it that time?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I believe in the truth. I believe in as near as damn it.
Yeah.
I think talking about here is kind of defensive thinking, as people say earlier on. The excuses that come out, and young people will, if they have an appropriate adult, see them at the police station when they get arrested, and that's dealt with there, and they go back home to mum and dad. The mum and dad get the shorthand version, and it wasn't that bad. He started it first, and all that kind of thing. We get to the police station and do the restory, as you're saying. It comes out that actually the young person did more than actually what he told his parents, and the parents, as Phil was saying, they switch around and you didn't tell me this. This is more what's happened, isn't it? And it lays it bare, and they do take responsibility for what they've done.
Match of the day, they've given the edited highlights to the parents.
Good.